What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, continuing my deep dive into Neil Young's studio albums. Today, album number 17th, Studio Eyes, 1987's Life. Like Rust Never Sleeps, this is also an album that the songs premiered live in 86, so the basic recordings are from live recordings, and then Neil went in the studio and did some overdubs. Unfortunately, he was a fan of this sound he heard on the radio, this big drum radio sound, very common in the 80s, and he wanted his albums to sound like that. So we get big drums, we get a lot of synth energy. This is like a dated 87 kind of synth rock with big drums album. I don't think it's as egregious a sound as on Landing on Water. I think this is a little more palatable to modern ears. I also think this has three things going for it that, one, make it much better than Landing on Water in a Neil Young sense, but just overall a more enjoyable experience than that previous album, which I do think it maybe kind of gets paired with a lot in Neil's trajectory or in his catalog, because at least in the 80s, it's the two albums that almost seem like they're from the same artist, and he's not genre hopping as crazy as he did on the previous ones, or as he would on the following one. And the three things I think it is going for it: the songs are better. I just think the songwriting is better. There were three songs, maybe four songs that have a very garage rock sound. Still overproduced and still a little too big drummy, but the energy is a little more garage rock. The energy is a little more pre-grungy. There's a little more of that Neil just kind of rocking out attitude. Plus, one of the songs is called Prisoners of Rock and Roll. Neil is still angry. He's still got a lot to say about the record company business and the record business and rock and roll and stuff like that. So even though he's technically back into rock and roll, he's still griping about it. He also has a song that deals with the Incas. We're going back to Inca life, a song called Inca Queen, the longest song on here. So, and he also, and this is maybe the best part, at least as far as the songwriting goes, apparently he's starting to question his love of Ronald Reagan and his patriotism he all of a sudden wholeheartedly discovered in the early 80s. And we have a couple songs on here that are in fact, the first three songs that are yeah, maybe America isn't quite doing the right thing around the world, and maybe we should question our foreign policy, and maybe things aren't as rosy as I thought. So lyrically, I think it's the old Neil is back a little bit. That's number one. Number two, even though the production is kind of overproduced, there is this undercurrent of really snarly, gnarly, nasty, grungy, distorted guitar that kind of runs through a lot of the songs. Mixed way too low. We can maybe lower the drums and up the guitar energy, and maybe we have a completely different album, especially since Crazy Horse is the band. We're not getting much Crazy Horse because of much of the production, I think. But that undercurrent, the more you listen to it, and especially if you listen to it on headphones or really loud, enhances the songs in a really, really good way. And there's a couple songs on here that just have these great guitar parts that are just buried a little too deeply in the mix. That's number two. The third thing this album has going for it is its leadoff track, Mideast Vacation. One of the greatest things Neil has ever done. Maybe not a top 10 song, but considering where we are in the 80s and 87, considering all things Neil, how he started to become this, almost reactionary patriot early in the 80s, to get to Mideast Vacation. Mideast Vacation opens the album and is responsible for why it's going to probably be higher on my list than it should be, and why I listen to it way more often than I probably deserve to be listened to, considering the quality of the rest of the songs, which are good, just not great. Mideast Vacation, I think, is great. Musically, it kind of sounds kind of like the vibe of the Drive-By Truckers Used to Be a Cop, which also has kind of a similar lyrical story, and Don Henley's Dirty Laundry, just this almost steady beat, kind of heartbeat pulse, but kind of upbeat. It's a narrative song. We don't get a verse, chorus. We just have this story of this man, a character who worshiped being a policeman, went into law enforcement, joined the army, went overseas on vacation, got burnt in effigy was Rambo in the disco. One of the greatest lines. I was Rambo in the disco. So yeah, great opening track, which Neil kind of opens that door to question sort of American U.S. policy. Song number 2 continues in that lyrical vein with a rewrite of a song called, Letter from Nam, which you can hear on Archives 2. It's the very first track on Archives 2. And that is a questioning the Americans' U.S. involvement in Vietnam. It's been updated to reference Nam and Beirut. We're more like still questioning what we're doing decades later. This one has some like bomb sounds that come in and some like, I don't think those were live. I think those were added in the studio, these bomb sounds. A lot of this stuff, you can hear the live versions of them on the Cow Palace 1986 CD. There's a number of these songs on here, and they don't really sound that much different live. He was bringing that big drum sound live. These just maybe sound a little more polished, a little more clean up, and have a little more like, really just almost like sound effects and like eyebrows added in the production for the most part. Long Walk Home. So it's a weird song. It starts off in almost like an After the Gold Rush, very early 70s with harmonica vibe. Then we go into all these different parts and these big like sound effects. It's an interesting song. Pretty compelling. Some of it works for me, some of it doesn't. And it starts off with this line about liberty, which you're like, okay, where are we going with this? But then we wind up in a interesting place. So Long Walk Home is an interesting song. And then the third song is Around the World, which has this just loud, pounding rock energy. But this is another one that seems to be like politically obsessed about the war and how the world deals with a whole bunch of different things. And it's sort of the everyday reality of the wars that are being fought versus just the reality of everyday life. There's a line about surfers from the 7 seas sharing with submarines. Great alliteration there. Some like guitar weird noises kind of percolating underneath. Really neat sort of noise solo that comes out of nowhere that's kind of awesome. Another one that's kind of lyrically, Neil's getting political, but I think it works with the sound, and it's dated, but I kind of like it. And then the fourth song is Inca Queen. 8 minutes. There's an Inca Queen. It's kind of a slow, swaying acoustic song. There's some big drum sound in there. There's some weird chanting that kind of goes on. As the song goes on, the groove kind of just becomes, the repetitiveness of the groove kind of lulls you in and kind of wins you over. And I like the fact that it's a longer song because it allows Neil to sort of establish this vibe and establish this routine. We get some bird sound effects. I don't know if they're South American birds. I don't know if there's an ornithologist. Are those the bird people? Want to listen to this track and tell me if the birds are accurate to Peru? I do not know. This was on, without the overdubs, there was a live version of this on the Archives website, Neil Young's website. And that's side A, which I think is a pretty strong side. Mideast Vacation, by far the best song on here. And then Long Walk Home, Around the World, and Inca Queen. Interesting little lyrical journey, sort of a musical journey. And then side 2, I got a comment, and I'll post the comment once we get to the end. So I don't have to mark this and find it later. But I got a comment on the Landing on Water video about somebody who bought it and originally didn't like it and kept listening to it and then fell in love with it. I don't feel that way about Landing on Water. I feel that way about this album, and it's these 3 songs that kind of won me over. Too Lonely, Prisoners of Rock and Roll, Crying Eyes, which the Ducks did back in 77, that Neil Young bar band. Garage rock, man. Just great sounding garage rock. Too Lonely, the opening drums kind of remind me of My Sharona, and I just expect this doo-doo-doo My Sharona bass line in there. Just a nice tightly wound rocker. Too lonely, too lonely. Almost rough, almost kind of sounds like The Police, quite a little bit. Just a really cool ragged rock vibe. Prisoners of Rock and Roll, calling out the record company, man. There's a repeated, I don't know if it's a chorus or just this refrain that pops up about, that's why we don't want to be good, because when you're good, they start to tell you what to do and they boss you around and they want you to be this thing and not experiment. There's a line about not wanting to be watered down. Just really defiant lyrics. I think the entire tour that they did from which this is from, this was like the encore, the closing number, and the whole like packaging of the tour was like, we're prisoners of rock and roll, people, help us break free. And then we get Crying Eyes, which has some of the craziest sounding squealing guitar on here, which I absolutely love. Nice driving rock sound. And then we close out with two slower songs, When Your Lonely Heart Breaks, which kind of reminds me of like a 80s Mr. Mister, that broken, what was the name of that song? Broken, it wasn't Broken Arrow, Broken something. Ugh. It's Broken something, that Mr. Mister song, or like a Richard Marx ballad, or something of just like an 80s kind of ballad with that like synth wash behind it. And then the last song, which the Motels actually covered for a movie soundtrack, We Never Danced. The Motels version is way overproduced, though I do think Martha, whatever her name is, Martha's voice is really good. My nose is starting to run, so I'm going to blow it really quick. Sorry about that. But I like We Never Danced. It's got this good little, I think it's a piano melody to open it up. That's pretty nice. Kind of a little mellower. Nice way to end the album. But yeah, some pretty good stuff. One of the other things on Archives 3, there are alternate versions of When Your Lonely Heart Breaks and We Never Danced. The version of When Your Lonely Heart Breaks, I believe it is. No, that's the one that sounds similar to the studio. The one that's We Never Danced on there is just piano solo with Neil's voice. Perfect. That would have closed the album out even better than this version. But this version I don't think is that bad. But there, that's it right there. That's the comment I got. I feel that way about this album. Was not the biggest fan of it when I first got it. But after a while, it kind of growed on me just because I always wanted to hear Middy's Vacation. So I kept going back to this album over and over and over again. Where would I rank the songs on here? I would rank the songs right there. Middy's Vacation, I think, is clearly the best. Then we have those two garage rock numbers, which I love. Inco Queen, which I don't think can quite compare to his other sort of South American, Central American, dedicated Native American, Mayan, Incan type dedicated songs, but it's still an interesting song. And after a while, it kind of wins you over. Long Walk Home, just because it's weird. Nice remake of Letter from Nam. Crying Eyes, Around the World, We Never Dance, and then I think When Your Lonely Heart Breaks is probably the weakest link on here. But then where would I rank it? Well, that's what the top 10 looks like right there. It did not make the top 10. That's currently where we sit at the top 10. So it actually made it right all the way at 15. I have it above Long May You Run. I don't think there's anything on Long May You Run as absolutely awesome as Middy's Vacation. And then the other stuff down there is really good. And it's really, Homegrown and Neil Young, I think, are really strong albums. Once we get to Hawks and Dove Down, that's when things start getting a little hit and miss for me. But I have this at 15. This is one of those that has won me over the decades. Middy's Vacation is a home run. Kind of get used to the bad sound. And I think Neil's trying. You can hear the Neil in this. You can feel the Neil fighting through. You can feel like his lost in the 80s period. He's finding himself, and we're gonna get some new like Neil that feels like Neil. Might be one more album until we get it, but it feels like it's coming. All right. That's all I got. Let me know your thoughts on this album. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. But yeah, if you want to hear some of these in their live version, Cow Palace 1986, I might drop a review of that before we hit the next album and move on out of this era. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Peace. Go listen to some Neil. Go listen to Middy's Vacation. If you've not heard that song, that's a winner, man. That's a winner. Peace. Talk to you later.